Stop scrolling because your entire childhood was basically a massive scam, and I am here to ruin it for you in the best way possible. Your history textbooks were full of more fake news than a tabloid magazine. From George Washington's wooden mouth to everything you think you know about Thanksgiving turkeys. I have got 111 stupid lies that will make your brain hurt. So smash that like button and subscribe right now, or I will tell everyone you still believe in the tooth fairy. Let's get weird. 1. You probably imagine George Washington flashing a smile made of lumber, like he kissed a tree. Teachers love telling us his teeth were wood, but that is just a splintery lie because the truth is straight out of a horror movie. The first president actually wore a nightmare contraption made of gold and lead and hippopotamus ivory and even human teeth. Wood would have turned to mush in 5 minutes of drinking tea, so he opted for other people's teeth instead. Receipts show he likely bought them from enslaved people at Mount Vernon for pennies. It is not exactly the heroic carpentry project you learned about in 2nd grade, because it is just a rich guy wearing other people's mouths. 2. Everyone pictures Paul Revere galloping solo through the midnight streets screaming at the top of his lungs about the British coming. This famous scene is total nonsense because yelling that phrase would have been incredibly stupid since everyone living there was still technically British. It would be like running through New York shouting that the Americans are coming. Revere was actually part of a massive secret network of riders who whispered quietly at doors to avoid getting caught by patrolling soldiers. He never even finished the ride because he got detained while others finished the job. History books just decided one loud guy on a horse looked cooler than a covert team operation, so they ignored the logic. 3. You probably picture sweet old Betsy Ross rocking in her chair and sewing the first American flag for George Washington. That heartwarming scene is a total fabrication cooked up by her grandson nearly 100 years later just to sell more books. There is zero record of Washington ever visiting her for a flag design, because the layout was actually created by a boring government committee. It is way less romantic than the story of a patriotic grandma, stitching stars by candlelight. We just love a good mascot, so we swallowed the lie. The reality is that she was just a normal upholsterer who had nothing to do with the original stars and stripes. 4. Your gym teacher swore that a guy named Abner Doubleday invented baseball in a dusty Cooperstown cow pasture in 1839. That is complete garbage because Abner was not even in Cooperstown that year since he was busy being a soldier at West Point. A sporting goods tycoon basically invented this myth decades later just to prove baseball was purely American and not stolen from British cricket. Baseball actually evolved slowly from boring old stick games. Doubleday never claimed he invented it, and he probably would be confused why his name is on so many souvenirs. We literally built a Hall of Fame on a total lie just for the merchandise sales. 5. Every Halloween movie shows witches tied to stakes and burning while crowds cheer in Salem. You need to stop picturing fire because nobody was burned in Salem since that was strictly a European trend. The Puritans were actually way cheaper and just used rope to hang 19 people while one poor guy got crushed by heavy rocks. It was a hysterical mess of neighbors accusing neighbors just to steal land or settle petty grudges. We made it look cinematic with flames, but the reality was just a bunch of religious extremists committing murder in the mud. It turns out American execution methods were way less flashy and much more depressing than movies. 6. You learned that Pilgrims and Native Americans held hands and ate turkey to start a happy annual tradition. That is a nice fairy tale, but the real story involves way more blood and way less pumpkin pie. The 1621 feast was a one-time awkward dinner that did not repeat because relations fell apart almost immediately. Most early Thanksgivings were actually declared by governors to celebrate brutal massacres of indigenous villages. It wasn't until Abraham Lincoln needed to unite the country during the Civil War that he turned it into a national holiday. We basically took a bloody history of colonization and whitewashed it with gravy and football to feel better. 7. History books love to say Rosa Parks was just a sweet old lady with tired feet who accidentally started a revolution. That minimizes her brilliance because she was actually a hardcore activist trained for that exact moment. The NAACP had been planning a bus boycott for a long time and they needed the perfect face for the campaign. A pregnant teenager had actually refused to give up her seat months earlier, but leaders thought she was too risky for PR. Rosa knew exactly what she was doing and sat there with a strategy. Calling her just a tired seamstress ignores the fact that she was a tactical genius fighting for justice. 8. You light fireworks on the 4th of July because you think the Founding Fathers all signed the Declaration that day. That is historically wrong because the actual vote for independence happened on July 2nd. The 4th was just the day they approved the final wording on the paper, but most guys did not even sign it until August. We are literally celebrating the day the printer finished the job rather than the day the decision was made. John Adams even wrote a letter saying July 2nd would be the big party date forever. We got the date wrong, and now we just blow up explosives to distract ourselves from the error. 9. We give Christopher Columbus way too much credit for proving the Earth was round and discovering America. That is double wrong because educated people had known the planet was a sphere since ancient Greece. Columbus was actually the dumb one who thought the Earth was small enough to sail to Asia without dying. He also never set foot in North America and only stumbled around the Caribbean islands while thinking he was in India. He was a lost sailor who got lucky that a continent was in his way. Giving him credit for science is like giving a toddler a degree for finding a penny on the floor. 10. You probably drew pictures of Columbus as a brave hero who just wanted to explore new worlds for fun. The guy was actually a brutal tyrant who was obsessed with finding gold and enslaving people. His governorship was so violent and horrific that he was actually arrested and sent back to Spain in chains. He cut off hands and ears of natives who did not bring him enough gold dust. It is wild that we gave this guy a federal holiday instead of a prison sentence. In the history books, he died miserable and delusional, still thinking he had found Asia, while everyone else realized he was a total monster. 11. You were told the Pilgrims came to America to establish a land of pure religious freedom for everyone. That is a hilarious joke because they actually only wanted freedom for themselves while being total control freaks to everyone else. If you were a Quaker or thought differently, they would banish you or even bore a hole through your tongue with a hot iron. They set up a strict theocracy that was basically the fun police on steroids. They did not cross an ocean to let you do whatever you want. They crossed it so they could be the ones making the rules. It turns out freedom just meant the freedom to be exactly like them. 12. Some people love to argue that the Civil War was all about noble states' rights and not slavery. That is the biggest cover-up in American history because the Confederates literally wrote slavery in their breakup letters. The only right they cared about was the right to own other human beings as farm equipment. Saying it was about taxes or tariffs is just a fancy way to avoid the ugly truth. They were willing to die just to keep an economy based on forced labor running. It is pretty awkward to defend heritage when the heritage is explicitly about keeping chains on people. 13. You probably think Abraham Lincoln signed a paper and suddenly every enslaved person was instantly free and happy. The Emancipation Proclamation was actually a strategic military move that didn't free a single person in the border states that stayed loyal. It only applied to the rebel states where Lincoln had zero authority at the time anyway. It was basically like a boss firing people who didn't work for him anymore just to make a point. Real freedom didn't happen until the 13th Amendment passed much later. We simplified a complex legal maneuver into a magic wand moment to make the history books feel nicer. 14. The name Underground Railroad makes you picture a literal subway train chugging beneath the dirt carrying people to freedom. That image is totally cartoonish because it was actually just a secret network of safe houses and brave people hiding in barns. Harriet Tubman was the conductor, but she didn't punch tickets for a steam engine. She walked miles in the dark with a gun. There were no tracks or tunnels involved, just dangerous hikes through swamps and forests. We took a cool code name way too literally and forgot that the real railroad was just human courage and very sore feet. 15. You can't picture a Viking without a helmet that has two giant horns sticking out of the sides. That fashion statement is completely fake and actually comes from a costume designer for a 19th century opera. Real Vikings wore boring, smooth helmets because horns would have been a handle for enemies to grab and snap your neck. Imagine going into battle wearing something that helps your opponent kill you faster. We basically confused a theater prop with historical fact because it looked scary. Authentic Vikings were terrifying enough without dressing like heavy metal cows, but the opera look stuck forever. 16. Everyone makes fun of short, angry guys by saying they have a Napoleon complex because the emperor was tiny. This insult is based on bad math, because Napoleon was actually average height or even slightly tall for his time. The confusion happened because French inches were longer than British inches, so his height sounded smaller on paper. British propaganda also loved drawing him as a little angry midget to make him look ridiculous. He wasn't a tiny man with a big ego. He was a regular-sized guy with a regular ego. We have been body-shaming a dead dictator for centuries over a unit conversion error. 17. You have definitely heard the fact that the Great Wall of China is the only object visible from space. That is a cool-sounding lie that started way before anyone had even been to space to check. Astronauts have confirmed repeatedly that you cannot see it with the naked eye because it is too narrow and blends in with the dirt. It is like trying to see a single hair from across a football stadium. NASA debunked this ages ago, but people keep repeating it to sound smart. We really want humans to be visible from the stars, but we are actually just too small. 18. Lazy students love to say that even Einstein failed math to feel better about their own bad grades. That is a comforting lie because Einstein was actually a child prodigy who mastered calculus before he could legally drive. The myth started because he failed an entrance exam for a school that was in a foreign language he didn't speak well. He crushed the math section but flunked the French and biology parts. Saying the smartest guy in history was bad at math is just a way to excuse your own laziness. He was a genius from the start, so you have to actually study. 19. People love saying humans only use 10% of their brains to unlock some hidden superpower potential. That is total sci-fi nonsense because neurologists know we use pretty much every part of the brain all day long. If 90% of your brain was actually offline, you could get shot in the head and be totally fine. Evolution would not waste energy building a massive organ if we were only using a tiny corner of it. This myth just sells self-help books and movies about magic pills. You are already using your whole brain. You might just be using it to watch dumb videos. 20. Your elementary school teacher probably made you color a chart showing where you taste sweet or sour on your tongue. That tongue map is scientific garbage based on a mistranslation of a German paper from 100 years ago. Every part of your tongue can taste every flavor equally well, so there are no special zones. You can test this right now by putting salt on the tip of your tongue and realizing it tastes salty. We spent decades teaching kids a lie, just because the diagram looked easy to color. It is proof that if a lie has a nice picture, schools will teach it. 21. Parents everywhere swear that a single cupcake turns their children into wall-climbing demons fueled by pure sugar. That is actually a total placebo effect, because science proves sugar does not cause hyperactivity at all. The chaos usually happens because kids are at a birthday party running around like maniacs anyway. Studies showed that when moms thought their kids had sugar, they rated them as wilder even when it was sugar-free. You are blaming the candy bar for your kid just being naturally annoying and energetic. It turns out the sugar rush is just a myth parents tell themselves to explain why their children are destroying the house. 22. Your mom probably yelled at you to stop cracking your knuckles or your hands would turn into gnarled claws. She was lying to you, because cracking your joints does absolutely nothing bad to your bones. That popping sound is just gas bubbles bursting in the fluid between your joints, which is actually kind of gross but harmless. One dedicated doctor cracked the knuckles on his left hand for 60 years and never touched his right hand to prove a point. His hands ended up exactly the same, so your habit is safe. You are just making noise to annoy people, not destroying your body. 23. Everyone jokes that goldfish have a 3-second memory and forget who they are before they swim across the bowl. That is an insult to fish intelligence because goldfish can actually remember things for months at a time. Scientists have trained them to push levers for food, and they remember the trick way longer than you remember algebra. We just tell ourselves they are stupid, so we do not feel bad about keeping them in tiny glass prisons. They recognize faces and can even tell time, which is terrifying. Your pet fish likely remembers exactly when you forgot to feed it last week. 24. The phrase blind as a bat is completely backwards because bats can actually see perfectly fine with their eyes. They just happen to have a superpower called echolocation that lets them scream at objects to see them in the dark. Being able to see with sound does not mean their eyeballs are broken, it just means they are overachievers. Some larger bats even hunt using just their vision during the day, like normal birds. We basically took a creature with supervision and night vision and called it handicapped. If you call someone blind as a bat, you are actually complimenting their night moves. 25. Teenagers start shaving their faces, hoping it will make their beards grow back like a thick lumberjack forest. This is a sad grooming myth because cutting hair does not change how fast or thick it grows from the root. It only looks darker and coarser because you sliced off the tapered tip, leaving a blunt edge. It is an optical illusion that feels prickly, but your hair genetics do not care about your razor. If shaving actually created more hair, bald guys would just shave their heads to cure baldness. You are just wasting shaving cream, chasing a beard that is not coming. 26. You ate piles of gross carrots because your parents promised it would give you super night vision like a ninja. You got scammed by World War II propaganda, created by the British military to hide their secret radar technology. They told the world their pilots ate carrots to spot German planes in the dark, so the enemy would not suspect the new tech. It worked so well that even American schools started teaching it as a health fact. Carrots have vitamins, but they will not help you see in the dark. You just ate a lot of orange vegetables for a lie. 27. People love to paint Robert E. Lee as a gentle Southern gentleman who secretly hated slavery and only fought for his home. That is a massive rewrite of history, because Lee owned slaves and fought aggressively in court to keep them. He called slavery a necessary evil and believed God wanted white people to control black people for their own good. He was a brutal slave master who authorized whippings when people tried to escape his plantation. The myth of the noble reluctant soldier was created later to make the South feel better. He fought a war to keep chains on people. 28. You might have learned that the Confederacy was a heroic lost cause fighting for liberty against a tyrannical North. This entire narrative was a marketing campaign invented after the war to erase the shame of losing for slavery. Former Confederate leaders wrote books and built statues to convince everyone they were actually the good guys protecting the Constitution. They buried the truth that their entire government was founded on the idea of racial superiority. It is basically the historical version of saying you did not get fired, you actually quit. We let the losers write the history books and pollute the classrooms. 29. Schools often teach that Reconstruction failed because freed slaves were corrupt or not ready for government leadership. That is victim blaming at its finest, because Reconstruction was actually destroyed by violent white mobs and domestic terrorism. Black politicians were actually doing a great job building schools and laws until the KKK and others started murdering them. The North eventually just got tired of protecting them and pulled the troops out, leaving the South to Jim Crow laws. It did not fail because of incompetence, it was actively sabotaged by people who hated equality. We blame the victims for their own oppression. 30. Andrew Jackson is celebrated on the $20 bill as the hero of the common man who fought the elites. That nickname is ironic because he was a wildly wealthy slave owner who lived in a mansion, not a cabin. He was also responsible for the Indian Removal Act, which forced thousands to die on the Trail of Tears. He ignored the Supreme Court just to steal land and commit genocide against native tribes. Calling him a man of the people is only true if you ignore all the people he owned or killed. He was basically a tyrant with good PR. 31. You were taught Manifest Destiny was just a peaceful American road trip west to fill up empty land. That is a pretty nice way to describe a bloody rampage that destroyed everything in its path. The government basically claimed God told them to steal half a continent so they could ignore treaties and start wars. It was not brave pioneers finding new homes, it was a state-sponsored invasion that displaced millions of Native Americans and Mexicans. We framed aggressive conquest as a divine mission just to make ourselves feel like the good guys. It turns out believing the world belongs to you makes you act like a total jerk. 32. Remember the Alamo as the ultimate heroic last stand where brave Texans died, fighting for their freedom. That story conveniently leaves out exactly what freedom they were actually fighting for in that fort. Mexico had outlawed slavery, and the Texans were furious because they wanted to keep owning people on their cotton farms. The defenders were not just patriots, they were illegal immigrants refusing to follow Mexican laws about human rights. We turned a battle over the right to enslave others into a symbol of liberty. It is awkward to cheer for the underdog when the underdog is fighting to keep the chains on someone else. 33. Hollywood movies convinced you that every cowboy was a rugged white guy with a square jaw like John Wayne. That is total fiction, because the real Wild West was incredibly diverse and way less white than the movies. Historians estimate that at least 1 in 4 cowboys was black, and many others were Mexican vaqueros. The very word cowboy comes from the Spanish word vaquero, but movies bleached the history for white audiences. These guys did the dirty, dangerous work of herding cattle while white actors got the credit. We erased the real faces of the frontier just to sell a specific brand of American hero. 34. You imagine the Wild West was a constant shootout, where everyone carried a revolver and dueled at high noon. The reality is that those Dust Bowl towns actually had stricter gun control laws than we do today. Most sheriffs required visitors to check their guns at the door, specifically to prevent drunk idiots from shooting each other. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral only happened because people were breaking the law by carrying weapons. It was actually safer to walk down the street in Tombstone than in modern cities. We invented the violence because watching people follow rules makes for a really boring Western movie. 35. You learned that Prohibition was a moral era where the government successfully banned alcohol to clean up society. That plan backfired so hard it actually made the country drunker and infinitely more dangerous than before. Banning booze just created a massive black market that turned petty thugs into millionaire crime lords like Al Capone. People drank dangerous homemade moonshine that could literally make them go blind or drop dead on the spot. Instead of a sober paradise, we got speakeasies and machine gun battles in the streets. It proved that telling Americans they cannot have something is the fastest way to make them want it. 36. The Roaring Twenties looked like one big non-stop party with flappers and jazz and endless champagne towers. That glamorous image only applied to a tiny slice of rich people while everyone else was struggling to survive. Farmers and factory workers were actually broke and drowning in debt long before the stock market crashed. The massive wealth gap was a ticking time bomb that led directly to the Great Depression misery. We focus on the sparkly dresses and parties because the reality of starving families is a buzzkill. It was not a golden age for America, it was just a golden age for the top 1%. 37. Conspiracy theorists love to whisper that FDR knew about the Pearl Harbor attack in advance and let it happen. That is a juicy story, but the truth is just boring old-fashioned government incompetence and missed signals. There were plenty of warning signs and intercepted messages, but nobody connected the dots in time to stop it. The military was messy and disorganized rather than part of some evil master plan to enter the war. Suggesting the president sacrificed thousands of sailors on purpose is insulting to history. We prefer a dark conspiracy because it is scarier to admit that our leaders just made a huge mistake. 38. Textbooks might say Japanese internment camps were a necessary security measure to protect the country during the war. That is a polite way to describe a racist land grab that targeted innocent American citizens. There was zero evidence of any, Japanese-American espionage, but the government locked them up anyway. White neighbors were often jealous of successful Japanese farmers and wanted to steal their land while they were imprisoned. It was fear and greed masquerading as patriotism, and it ruined thousands of lives for no reason. We locked up our own people based on their face shape and pretended it was for safety. 39. You were taught that the atomic bombs were the only thing that could stop World War II and save lives. That simple story ignores the fact that the Soviet Union invaded Japanese territory at the exact same time. Japan was arguably more terrified of a communist takeover by Stalin than they were of American bombs. They were already looking for a way to surrender before the bombs dropped, but wanted to keep their emperor. We tell the story this way to justify using a horrific weapon on civilians. The war ended because Japan was getting crushed from both sides, not just because of our superweapon. 40. Senator Joe McCarthy is sometimes remembered as a tough guy who rooted out dangerous communist spies in the government. The guy was actually a drunk bully who ruined innocent lives with absolutely zero evidence. He waved around a fake list of names that was just a prop to scare people and get himself on television. He destroyed the careers of teachers and actors and writers just because they had different political opinions. It was a paranoid witch hunt that made Americans terrified to speak their minds. We let a loudmouth liar trample the Constitution because we were too scared to stand up to his nonsense. 41. You imagine the 1950s as a perfect sitcom world where everyone was happy and lawnmowers were always running. That nostalgic image is basically a marketing scam because the era was actually a nightmare of crushing conformity and paranoia. While TV families smiled, real people were terrified of nuclear war and neighbors spying on each other for the government. It was also a horrific time for anyone who was not white or straight thanks to segregation and repression. We scrubbed the history books to make it look like a pleasant vacation from reality. The only thing idyllic about the 50s was the television shows designed to make you forget the misery outside. 42. Teachers explained the Vietnam War with a simple board game logic called the domino theory. They said if one country turned communist, then all the neighbors would fall over just like toy blocks. This was a massive oversimplification that totally ignored centuries of Vietnamese history and their desire for independence. We treated a complex civil war like a game of checkers and jumped in without understanding the players. The reality was that Vietnam was fighting for its own identity, not just blindly following a global red wave. We ruined millions of lives because we treated geopolitics like a simple game in a kindergarten classroom. 43. People think Watergate was just a clumsy break-in where some guys got caught stealing files in the dark. That minimizes the scandal because the burglary was just the tiny tip of a massive corrupt iceberg. The real crime was the frantic cover-up orchestrated by President Nixon to use the CIA and FBI as his personal goons. It was not just about stealing papers. It was about the president acting like a mob boss to crush his enemies. We remember the tape on the door latch, but forget the terrifying abuse of power that almost broke the government. It was way darker than just a third-rate burglary gone wrong. 44. You think your great-grandpa got a new cool last name because a lazy clerk at Ellis Island could not spell. That is a total myth because immigration officials actually worked off detailed ship manifests written before the boat even left Europe. They did not just make up names on the spot because they were bored or tired. Name changes usually happened later when immigrants wanted to fit in or sound more American to get jobs. Your ancestors likely changed their own names to survive, not because a government worker was bad at listening. We just love the idea of an accidental identity to explain our family history. 45. You think the Boston Tea Party happened because the British hiked up the price of tea to punish the colonists. The truth is actually the opposite because the British government had just lowered the tea tax to help a struggling megacorporation. The colonists were angry because this special tax break gave the British East India Company a monopoly that crushed local business. It was a protest against corporate bailouts and lack of representation, not just a complaint about the bill. We turned a complex economic protest into a simple story about hating expensive drinks. They dumped the tea to fight a monopoly, not a price hike. 46. Disney convinced you that Pocahontas and John Smith had a steamy romance and sang songs in the wind. That is basically criminal because Pocahontas was a child around 10 years old, and Smith was a bearded guy in his late 20s. There was absolutely no romance, and the story about her saving his life was likely a misunderstood tribal adoption ritual. Smith didn't even tell the story until 17 years later when she was famous, and couldn't contradict him. We turned a creepy encounter between a soldier and a child into a love story to make colonization feel warm and fuzzy. 47. We call Thomas Edison the wizard who invented the light bulb and brought light to the world. He was more like a wizard of patents because he didn't actually invent the light bulb at all. A British guy named Joseph Swan had a working bulb years earlier, and Edison just improved the filament to make it last longer. Edison was a brilliant businessman who bought other people's ideas and slapped his name on the box. He was the Steve Jobs of the 19th century, taking existing tech and marketing it until everyone thought he made it. We worship the salesman and forget the actual inventors. 48. Creationists love asking why monkeys still exist if we supposedly evolved from them in the jungle. That question shows they flunked biology because humans did not evolve from the monkeys you see at the zoo today. We actually share a common ancestor with them that lived millions of years ago, and then we split into different family trees. It is like saying you can't be related to your cousin because your cousin is still alive. We are distant relatives who went to college while the other apes stayed in the forest. Understanding evolution means realizing we are cousins, not the children of modern chimps. 49. You probably looked at your wrist and saw blue veins and thought your blood was blue until it hit the air. That is a playground lie because human blood is always red thanks to the iron inside your hemoglobin. The blood inside your veins is just a darker shade of red because it is carrying less oxygen back to the heart. It looks blue because of the way light penetrates your skin and reflects back to your eyes. You are not a horseshoe crab or an alien royalty with blue blood. We just came up with a colorful explanation for a simple trick of the light. 50. You learned George Washington was so honest, he admitted chopping down a cherry tree with his little hatchet. That heartwarming story of integrity was completely made up by a biographer named Parson Weems to sell books to patriotic suckers. Washington was a normal kid who probably lied about plenty of things, just like everyone else. Weems invented the story years after Washington died because he wanted to turn the president into a perfect saint. We have spent centuries teaching kids a lie about honesty, which is the ultimate irony. It turns out the story about not telling a lie is actually a huge lie itself. 51. You feel safe standing in a spot where lightning just struck because you heard it never strikes the same place twice. That advice could literally get you killed because lightning absolutely loves striking the same high points over and over. The Empire State Building gets zapped about 25 times every single year and sometimes multiple times in one storm. Lightning is just electricity looking for the easiest path to the ground, and it does not care about your idioms. If you stand there waiting for safety, you are just making yourself a very easy target for round 2. 52. Cartoons taught you that chameleons change color to match the wallpaper and hide from their enemies. That is a colorful lie because chameleons mostly change their skin based on their mood and the temperature. If a chameleon turns dark, it is probably cold and trying to absorb heat, not trying to look like a rock. They also change colors to signal aggression to other males or to impress a female mate. They are basically wearing their emotions on their skin rather than playing hide-and-seek. We just assumed it was camouflage because we think everything revolves around hiding. 53. You assume winter happens because the Earth drifts far away from the sun and gets chilly. That makes sense, but it is dead wrong because the Earth is actually closest to the sun in January. The seasons are caused entirely by the tilt of the Earth's axis as we spin through space. When the northern hemisphere tilts away from the sun, the light hits us at a shallow angle and spreads out. You are freezing in the winter despite being physically closer to the giant fireball. We blame the distance when we should really be blaming the angle of the dangle. 54. You are still mad that scientists bullied Pluto and kicked it out of the Planet Club for being too small. Size actually wasn't the main reason because Pluto is smaller than our own moon, but the real issue is its messy neighborhood. To be a planet, you have to clear your orbit of debris, and Pluto is just floating in a junk pile of ice, rocks. It is essentially a disorderly conduct charge rather than a height requirement that got it demoted. We anthropomorphized a rock and got our feelings hurt over a definition. Pluto is doing just fine as a dwarf planet without your pity. 55. We blame a poor cow for burning down the entire city of Chicago in a massive fire in 1871. The story goes that Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over a lantern, but that was fake news created to sell newspapers. The reporter later admitted he made it up because the public loved a simple story with a clear villain. It also played into anti-Irish prejudice by blaming a poor immigrant woman for the disaster. The fire actually started in a dry summer with wooden buildings and could have been anything. We slandered a cow for a century just to have a scapegoat. For a tragedy? 56. You picture the tortured artist Van Gogh slicing off his entire ear and mailing it to a lover. He was definitely unstable, but he actually only cut off a small part of his earlobe during his breakdown. The story grew into the full ear because people love the drama of a mad genius destroying himself. He bandaged his whole head, which helped spread the rumor that the whole thing was gone. It was still a bloody and disturbing cry for help, but not the total amputation you imagine. We exaggerated his mental illness to make his paintings seem even more tragic and valuable. 57. You think Marie Antoinette was a snob who said let them eat cake when she heard peasants were starving. She never said that famous line because it was actually written by Rousseau about a different princess years before Marie was even queen. Revolutionaries pinned the quote on her to make the French people hate the monarchy even more. She was definitely out of touch with regular people, but she wasn't a cartoon villain mocking the hungry. We destroyed her reputation with a meme from the 18th century that went viral. It is a classic case of fake quotes ruining someone's life forever. 58. Kindergarten teachers taught you that humans have exactly 5 basic senses like sight and smell. That is a massive undercount because your body is actually a complex machine with way more sensors than that. You have a sense of balance, a sense of temperature, and a sense of where your limbs are in space. If you only had 5 senses, you would fall over and burn your hand on a stove without realizing it. Scientists argue there could be anywhere from 9 to 20 distinct senses keeping you alive. We dumbed down human biology to make it fit on one hand. 59. You are terrified to swallow gum because you think it stays in your stomach for 7 years. That is a total playground legend because your stomach is not a sticky storage locker for candy. Gum base is indigestible, so your body just moves it along the digestive tract like corn or fiber. It comes out the other end in a couple of days just like everything else you eat. The only way it hurts you is if you swallow a massive wad that blocks your pipes. We invented this myth just to stop kids from being gross. 60. Kids on the playground swore daddy long legs are the deadliest spiders, but their mouths are too small to bite. That is a double lie because daddy long legs are not even technically spiders. They are harvestmen. They also do not have venom glands at all, so they are completely harmless to humans. The myth probably started because they kill other spiders and kids assumed they must be super toxic. You have been running away from a creature that literally cannot hurt you if it tried. It is the most misunderstood bug in your backyard. 61. Everyone freaks out because they heard the statistic that we swallow 8 spiders every year while sleeping. That is a total lie, invented by a magazine columnist in the 90s, just to prove how gullible people are on the internet. Spiders actually have zero interest in crawling into a warm, wet cave that is breathing, heavy, and making noise. They use vibrations to sense danger, and your snoring mouth is basically a terrifying death trap to them. You have probably never swallowed a spider in your life unless you were riding a motorcycle with your mouth open. We fell for a prank designed to mock us. 62. You definitely ran away from toads in the backyard because you thought touching their bumpy skin gave you warts. That is a playground myth because warts are actually caused by a human virus and have nothing to do with amphibians. The bumps on a toad are just glands that help them stay hydrated and not disgusting contagious sores. You can hug as many toads as you want and your skin will remain perfectly smooth. We basically shamed an innocent animal just because it had bad skin, and we didn't understand basic dermatology. You owe that toad an apology for running away screaming. 63. It is a super creepy factoid that your hair and fingernails keep growing even after you are dead. That is biologically impossible because your cells need energy and blood to grow, which obviously stops when you die. The illusion happens because your skin dries out and shrinks back, which exposes more of your nails and hair stubble. It looks like they got longer, but really your body just got smaller and shriveled up like a raisin. We invented a zombie movie feature to explain a simple process of dehydration. The dead are not growing, they are just drying out and looking scary. 64. Physics teachers sometimes let you believe that a penny dropped from the Empire State Building could crack the sidewalk or kill a pedestrian. That is pure Hollywood physics because a penny is too light and flat to gather that much speed. It would flutter down and hit terminal velocity pretty quickly, meaning it would just bounce off someone's head like a light tap. It might sting a little bit, but it certainly isn't going to punch a hole through a human skull. We turned a small piece of copper into a deadly missile because we don't understand wind resistance. 65. You would bet your life savings that Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on planet Earth. You would lose that bet because Mauna Kea in Hawaii is technically taller if you measure from the actual base underwater. Everest is only the highest point above sea level, but Mauna Kea is a bigger mountain overall. We just ignore the underwater part because humans are biased toward things we can actually see without a submarine. It is like saying a guy standing in a pool is shorter just because you can't see his legs. Everest is just the tallest one that is dry. 66. You memorize the names Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria as the holy trinity of ships that sailed the ocean blue. Those were actually just casual nicknames given by the sailors, and not the official names on the registration papers. The Santa Maria was really called La Santa Gallega, and the Pinta was likely a nickname for a painted ship. Sailors were superstitious, and often used religious names or funny slang for their vessels. We taught you the slang terms instead of the real ones because they sounded catchier in a rhyme. It is like history remembering your car as the Blue Beast. 67. You have seen the Iron Maiden in museums and movies as the ultimate medieval torture device for heretics. That is a total fraud because the Iron Maiden was never used in the Middle Ages at all. It was actually pieced together in the 19th century by showmen who wanted to make the past look scary and barbaric to sell tickets. They basically built a fake prop to shock tourists and pretended it was an ancient relic. We look at it with horror, but no medieval person ever saw one. It is just a spooky tourist trap invention designed to gross you out. 68. The image of Emperor Nero playing a fiddle on a balcony while Rome burned to the ground is iconic. It is also historically impossible because the fiddle or violin had not even been invented yet in ancient Rome. Nero was actually not even in the city when the fire started and rushed back to organize relief efforts for the victims. His political enemies created the rumor later to make him look like a heartless monster. We remember the musical number but forget that he was actually trying to put out the fire. It is ancient fake news that survived for centuries. 69. We need to circle back to Columbus because you likely think he sailed to prove the Earth was round against idiots who thought it was flat. That is false because every educated person in 1492 already knew the world was a sphere. The real dispute was about math, because Columbus thought the Earth was tiny and he could reach Asia quickly. The experts correctly told him the ocean was huge and he would die before he got there. He was wrong about the math and only survived because he bumped into a continent nobody knew about. 70. You picture the Pilgrims stepping off the Mayflower and planting their boots directly onto a specific boulder called Plymouth Rock. That rock is basically a tourist trap because the Pilgrims never mentioned it in any of their writings. It was identified over a century later by an old man who claimed his father told him about it. The rock itself has been moved and broken and glued back together so many times it is barely a rock anymore. We literally worship a random stone that probably no pilgrim ever touched. It is a pet rock with a patriotic backstory. 71. You think Abraham Lincoln was a die-hard abolitionist from birth who always wanted to destroy slavery immediately. The truth is more complicated because early in his career, he stated he would keep slavery if it saved the Union. His views evolved slowly over time as the war progressed and he realized ending slavery was the only way to win. He was a politician navigating a crisis rather than a moral crusader from day one. It makes him more human to realize he had to learn and change his mind. We simplified his journey into a superhero origin story. 72. Movies show Civil War doctors hacking off limbs while soldiers scream in agony with only a stick to bite on. That is a gruesome myth because anesthesia like chloroform and ether was actually widely used during the war. Doctors performed thousands of surgeries and over 90% of them used some form of painkiller. The image of the biting stick is dramatic, but most soldiers were happily unconscious during the amputation. We prefer the horror story because it makes the soldiers look tougher and the medicine look more barbaric than it really was. 73. You learned that prohibition happened because religious ladies wanted to stop husbands from drinking away their paychecks. That was part of it, but the real driving force was actually ugly anti-immigrant racism. Nativists associated beer with Germans and whiskey with the Irish and wanted to shut down their cultures. Banning alcohol was a convenient, legal way to target and harass immigrant communities they did not like. It was not just about moral health, it was about controlling who got to be a real American. We hid the xenophobia behind a story about sober living. 74. You think Rosie the Riveter was a real woman who posed for that famous "We Can Do It" poster? The truth is that the poster was just internal propaganda for Westinghouse factories and was not famous during the war. Rosie is actually a composite character based on several different women working in factories. The most famous image was not even called Rosie at the time. It was just a motivational drawing. We created a singular feminist icon out of a corporate poster that most people in the 40s never even saw. She is a modern legend, not a wartime reality. 75. Schools in the Cold War taught kids to duck and cover under their desks to survive a nuclear bomb. That drill was total security theater because a wooden desk is not going to stop a thermal blast or radiation. The government knew it was useless, but they needed to give people something to do so they would not panic. It was basically a psychological pacifier to make parents feel like they had a plan for the apocalypse. Hiding under a table during a nuke is like using an umbrella to stop a meteor. 76. Internet trolls might have convinced you that the moon landing was filmed on a soundstage in Hollywood. That is the dumbest conspiracy ever because it would have been harder to fake the footage than to actually go to the moon. The lighting and shadows in the video are impossible to recreate with 1960s studio technology. We also left mirrors up there that scientists still bounce lasers off of today to measure distance. Thousands of people worked on the rocket, and keeping them all quiet would be a miracle. We went to the moon. You just need to get over it. 77. You are terrified of flying over the Bermuda Triangle because you think planes and ships vanish there constantly. That is a manufactured mystery because statistics show that area has the exact same accident rate as anywhere else. It is a heavily traveled patch of ocean, so naturally there are crashes, but not because of aliens or ghosts. Insurance companies do not even charge extra to route ships through it because they know it is safe. We just love a spooky story, so we ignore the fact that thousands of boats sail through it every day without disappearing. 78. Cartoons like the Flintstones made you think humans and dinosaurs lived together and maybe even fought each other. That is wildly wrong because dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years before the first humans ever showed up. We missed the dinosaur party by an absolute eternity of time. The only dinosaurs humans have ever interacted with are the birds outside your window, which are their descendants. Thinking we hunted T-Rexes is a fun fantasy, but in reality we would have been bite-sized snacks. We are separated by millions of years of rock and dirt. 79. You probably think your taste buds are only on your tongue because that is what the mirror shows you. That is incorrect because you actually have taste receptors all over the inside of your mouth and even in your throat. You can taste things on the roof of your mouth and down your esophagus as you swallow. Kids have even more sensitive mouths than adults, which is why they hate bitter vegetables. We focused so much on the tongue that we forgot the rest of the mouth is also invited to the flavor party. 80. You have been told you are either a creative right-brained person or a logical left-brained person. That personality test is scientifically bogus because you use both sides of your brain for almost everything you do. Brain scans show that math and art light up connections across the entire organ, not just one side. The hemispheres do communicate and specialize, but they do not work in isolation like separate roommates. You are not right-brained. You are whole-brained unless you are missing half of it. We love labels, but your brain is too complex for that simple box. 81. You have definitely heard the terrifying rumor that vaccines cause autism because a celebrity shouted it on television. That entire panic started from a single study by a British doctor who had his medical license revoked for lying and faking data. He was trying to sell his own alternative vaccine patent by scaring parents away from the standard shots. Millions of dollars have been spent on studies since then, and not a single one has found a link between shots and autism. We are literally bringing back measles and polio because people trusted a fraud who wanted to get rich quick. 82. People in the grocery store act like GMOs are scary frankenfoods created by mad scientists in a dungeon. The truth is that humans have been genetically modifying food for thousands of years through selective breeding, on farms. The corn you eat used to be a tiny inedible grass until we engineered it to be giant and yellow and sweet. There is absolutely no scientific evidence that modern GMOs are dangerous to your health or your DNA. You are scared of a label while happily eating a banana that is a genetic mutant clone that cannot reproduce in the wild. 83. People love to dismiss evolution by saying it is just a theory, like it is a hunch Sherlock Holmes had. In the world of science, the word theory actually means a comprehensive explanation backed by mountains of solid evidence and facts. Gravity is also just a theory, but you do not see people floating away because they doubt the physics. Calling evolution a guess is like calling the blueprint of a skyscraper a doodle on a napkin. It is the foundation of all modern biology, and pretending it is weak just shows you do not understand the dictionary definition. 84. You probably beg your doctor for antibiotics every time you get a sniffle because you want to nuke the sickness. That is completely useless against a cold or flu because antibiotics only kill bacteria and do absolutely nothing to viruses. You are basically poisoning your own gut and helping to create superbugs that are resistant to medicine. Viruses are not even technically alive, so you cannot kill them with poison designed for living bacteria. We have turned a miracle drug into a candy we take for the wrong reasons, and it is going to ruin medicine for everyone. 85. Your uncle loves to look out the window during a blizzard and joke that global warming must be over. That is a dumb confusion between local weather today and the long-term climate trends of the entire planet. The data clearly shows the average temperature of the Earth is skyrocketing, regardless of the snow in your driveway. Using a cold day to disprove climate change is like saying, world hunger is over because you just ate a sandwich. The planet is definitely getting hotter, and the ice caps do not care about your snowball argument or your politics. 86. Some politicians have claimed that the noise from wind turbines causes cancer, which sounds like a bad science fiction plot. There is zero medical evidence anywhere in the world that wind farm noise causes tumors or any other disease. The only thing windmills kill is the occasional bird and the view from your golf course. It is a completely baseless scare tactic designed to protect the oil and coal industries from competition. You can stand under a windmill all day, and the only danger is getting dizzy watching the blades spin around in the breeze. 87. You picture the Founding Fathers as a group of devout Christians who built America solely on biblical principles. Many of them were actually deists who believed in a distant clockmaker god, but not an organized church religion. Thomas Jefferson even took a razor to his Bible and cut out all the miracles because he thought they were nonsense. They wrote the First Amendment specifically to keep the church away from the government, not to merge them together. We reimagine them as preachers to fit modern politics, but they were actually radical secular thinkers for their time. 88. We treat the U.S. Constitution like a sacred holy text that was perfect the moment the ink dried. That ignores the fact that the original document counted black people as 3/5 of a person and protected slavery. It was a flawed, rough draft that has been patched and updated 27 times just to make it functional. The founders knew it was imperfect, which is why they included instructions on how to fix it later. Worshipping the original text means ignoring the fact that it needed a massive overhaul to actually offer freedom to anyone but white men. 89. The American dream tells you that anyone can become a billionaire if they just work hard enough and stop buying coffee. Statistics show that upward social mobility in the U.S. is actually lower than in many other developed countries. The system is often rigged by generational wealth and systemic barriers that keep poor people poor no matter how hard they try. We love the lottery winner stories because they distract us from the millions who work 2 jobs and still cannot pay rent. Hard work matters, but the game is definitely played on a tilted table. 90. You were taught that the United States always intervenes in foreign countries to spread democracy and freedom. History shows we have happily toppled democratically elected leaders and supported brutal dictators when it suited our wallet. We overthrew governments in Iran and Chile and Guatemala just to protect oil prices or fruit companies. It was never really about the ballot box. It was always about control and cold, hard cash. We sell the war as a freedom delivery service, but the package usually contains a friendly tyrant who listens to us. 91. Every Thanksgiving, your family blames the turkey for the massive coma you fall into on the couch. You claim it is the tryptophan in the bird, but that is a myth because chicken and cheddar cheese have more of it. You are actually sleepy because you just ate 3,000 calories of carbs and fat in 20 minutes. Your body is diverting all its energy to digest that mountain of mashed potatoes and stuffing. Blaming the bird is just a convenient excuse for your absolute lack of portion control during the holiday feast. 92. Your grandma told you not to drink coffee because it would stunt your growth and you would be short forever. That myth comes from old advertising campaigns for a coffee substitute called Postum. that wanted to scare kids. There is no scientific link between caffeine intake and bone growth or height in children or adults. You ended up the height you are because of your genetics, not because you had a latte in high school. You effectively denied yourself a delicious energy boost for years based on a marketing lie from the early 1900s. 93. You were scolded for reading in the dark because your mom said it would permanently ruin your eyesight. Reading in dim light can cause temporary eye strain and a headache, but it does not cause long-term damage. Your eyes are resilient muscles that recover quickly once you turn the lights back on or get some sleep. It is the same as your legs getting tired after a run. They do not stay tired forever. You can read under the covers with a flashlight all you want without going blind despite the parental warnings. 94. You avoid MSG in Chinese food because you think it gives you headaches and makes you feel sick. This is known as Chinese restaurant syndrome, and it is a myth rooted in old xenophobia against Asian immigrants. MSG is just a savory salt found naturally in tomatoes and cheese and mushrooms that you eat daily. Double-blind studies show people cannot tell the difference and get no symptoms when they do not know it is there. You are likely just dehydrated from the sodium, but you blamed a foreign ingredient because it sounded scary. 95. You spend half your paycheck in the organic aisle because you assume it is automatically healthier and safer. Studies show that organic foods have almost identical nutritional content to conventional produce and are not magical superfoods. Organic farms also use pesticides. They just have to be derived from natural sources, which can still be toxic. You are paying a massive premium for a label that makes you feel superior rather than actually making you healthier. It is a marketing genius move to sell you a slightly smaller apple for double the price. 96. Cereal companies convinced you that breakfast is the most important meal of the day to sell cornflakes. That slogan was literally a marketing tagline, created to boost sales of processed grain in the morning. Humans are perfectly capable of skipping breakfast, and many people actually feel more alert with intermittent fasting. You do not need a sugar bomb at 7 in the morning to survive the day. We turned a corporate sales pitch into a nutritional law that parents enforce like a religion. 97. You carry around a giant water bottle because you heard you need 8 glasses a day to survive. That rule is a total fabrication because you get a huge amount of water from the food you eat. Even coffee and tea count towards your hydration, despite what people say about them being diuretics. You only need to drink when you are thirsty, and your body is great at telling you when that is. Forcing yourself to drown in gallons of water is just making you run to the bathroom constantly for no reason. 98. Cartoons taught you that ostriches bury their heads in the sand to hide when they get scared. That would be a suicide move because the bird would literally suffocate and die in a few minutes. They actually dig holes in the dirt to turn their eggs, and from a distance it looks like their head is buried. If an ostrich is actually threatened, it will just run away at 40 miles per hour or kick you to death. We insulted a dangerous dinosaur bird by calling it a coward. 99. You think lemmings are mindless idiots who commit mass suicide by jumping off cliffs in a herd. That entire scene was staged by Disney filmmakers for a nature documentary called White Wilderness in the 50s. The producers literally bought a truckload of lemmings and pushed them off the cliff to get the dramatic shot. Lemmings do not kill themselves on purpose, and the myth is entirely due to animal cruelty by a film crew. We use them as a metaphor for stupidity, but the humans were the real idiots. 100. You look at a camel and think those humps are giant tanks filled with sloshing water for the desert. Those humps are actually mounds of fat that the camel uses for energy when food is scarce. Storing all the fat in one place helps the camel stay cool by keeping the rest of its body lean. When they are thirsty, they drink 30 gallons of water in minutes and store it in their blood. You are basically looking at a camel wearing a backpack of lunch meat, not a water cooler. 101. You see a koala sleeping in a tree and assume it is stoned out of its mind on eucalyptus leaves. The internet loves to joke that these bears are constantly drunk, but they are actually just malnourished and exhausted. Eucalyptus is incredibly toxic and has almost zero nutritional value, so digestion takes massive amounts of energy. The koala sleeps 20 hours a day not because it is partying, but because it is literally starving to death in slow motion. We mistake a survival coma for a chill vibe because we want the cute bear to be a pothead. It is just a very tired animal eating poison garbage. 102. Documentaries with dramatic music convinced you that penguins are the ultimate romantic monogamists who mate for life. While they do pair up for a season to raise a chick, penguin divorce is actually incredibly common and brutal. If a male is late returning to the nest, or if the breeding season fails, the female will happily dump him for a better guy next year. Some species have split rates as high as 80%, so their relationships are messier than a reality TV show. We project our own marriage fantasies onto birds that are just trying to survive the ice. 103. Movies like Jaws made you terrified that a single drop of blood in the ocean summons sharks from miles away. That is a total exaggeration because sharks have great noses, but they are not magical blood-tracking radars. They can smell blood from a few hundred yards away, which is impressive, but not across an entire ocean. If you scrape your knee at the beach, a shark in the next town does not suddenly turn around and start sprinting. We turned a biological sense of smell into a supernatural superpower just to make swimming feel like a horror movie. 104. Cartoons have shown you giant elephants screeching and jumping on stools because of a tiny mouse. This old myth implies that the biggest land animal is a coward, but elephants do not actually fear mice specifically. They have terrible eyesight and get startled by anything small and fast darting around their feet. They would react the exact same way if you threw a fast rock or a cat in front of them. It is just a surprise reaction to a sudden movement, not a phobia of rodents. We just love the irony of a giant beast scared of a tiny squeak. 105. You probably stay far away from porcupines because you think they can shoot their sharp quills like a crossbow. That is biologically impossible because quills are just modified hairs, and no animal can launch its hair at you like a missile. Porcupines actually defend themselves by backing up into predators, and the quills detach easily upon contact. You have to actually touch the animal to get stuck, so just do not try to pet the prickly pine cone. We invented the projectile weapon myth because we cannot believe something so slow could defend itself without a gun. 106. You crack open a fortune cookie at the end of a meal and think you are partaking in an ancient Chinese tradition. You are actually participating in a purely American ritual, because fortune cookies were invented in California in the early 1900s. They are likely derived from a Japanese cracker, but were popularized by San Francisco bakeries to entertain tourists. If you go to China and ask for a fortune cookie, locals will look at you like you are insane. We took a sugary American cookie and pretended it was exotic wisdom just to sell more takeout food. 107. You order chop suey thinking you are eating a culinary masterpiece straight from the heart of Beijing. That dish is actually about as Chinese as a hamburger because it was created in the United States for picky eaters. The legend says a chef in San Francisco just threw a bunch of leftovers and vegetable scraps into a pan to feed drunk miners. It translates roughly to odds and ends because it is basically a garbage plate of whatever was available. We convinced ourselves that a plate of American scraps was authentic foreign cuisine because it had soy sauce. 108. People love to say that Eskimos have 100 different words for snow to prove how attuned they are to nature. That is a linguistic misunderstanding because their language builds complex words by jamming smaller parts together. They are really just describing the snow with adjectives like wet snow or falling snow, just like we do in English. We do not say we have 1,000 words for cars just because we can say blue car or fast car. We exaggerated a grammar rule into a mystical fact to make their culture seem more poetic and mysterious than our own. 109. You giggle at the idea of an Eskimo kiss where people rub noses because their lips would freeze together. That is a silly cartoon explanation for a real greeting called the kunik, which is more about smelling. It is an affectionate way to greet family by sniffing their cheeks or hair, which is intimate in a cold climate. They absolutely kiss with their lips just like everyone else when they are inside and warm. We reduced a cultural gesture of affection into a weird survival tactic because we think everything in the Arctic revolves around freezing to death. 110. You might have heard that Napoleon banned sugar beets because he was a picky tyrant who hated vegetables. The truth is the exact opposite because he actually ordered the massive planting of beets to save the French economy. The British had blockaded the ports and cut off the supply of sugarcane from the Caribbean islands. Napoleon needed a new source of sweetness, so he jump-started the entire sugar beet industry that we still use today. We twisted a story of economic innovation into a weird dietary restriction because we like making dictators seem petty and crazy. 111. The biggest lie of all is that history is a straight line of constant progress where everything always gets better. We assume the future is automatically smarter and freer, but history is actually full of massive steps backward. Civilizations collapse, and technology is lost, and rights are taken away just as often as they are gained. Thinking that things only improve makes us lazy because we assume the world fixes itself on autopilot. The reality is that progress is fragile and can vanish overnight if we stop paying attention. We are not guaranteed a happy ending just because time passes. Now that I have successfully destroyed your entire childhood and proved that your high school diploma is basically worthless paper, you need to smash that subscribe button and share this video, or you will be doomed to repeat these embarrassing lies forever. This is Dumb History, where we make you smarter by proving how stupid the past really was. Drop a comment below and admit which one of these lies you actually believed until today. Was it the swallowing spiders myth or the wooden teeth? Now click this next video on the screen to keep unclogging your brain, because we are just getting started.